into Jeffrey Epstein. Marks the largest batch of files shared to date. The documents put out on Friday shed new light on Epstein's relationships with several prominent figures from the U.S. and U.K. They also contain a significant number of uncorroborated tips to law enforcement. The DOJ says it redacted images of all women except Epstein's associate, Ghislaine Maxwell, in order to protect survivors' identities. They also withheld documents containing their personal or medical information, as well as depictions of child sexual abuse and material showing death or violence. DOJ officials indicated this is likely the final major release of Epstein files, despite federal prosecutors.
3 million new pages, 180,000 images, 2,000 videos, and more than 5,300 documents containing over 38,000 references to Donald Trump. That is what the Department of Justice released on January 30th, 2026, the largest single disclosure in the history of the Epstein files, published on a Friday, 6 weeks past the legally mandated deadline. And it came with a claim from Deputy Attorney General Todd Blanche that this was effectively the final major release, fulfilling the requirement established by the Epstein Files Transparency Act. Congressman Ro Khanna disagrees. So does Congressman Thomas Massie. And so does every surviving victim of Jeffrey Epstein's abuse, who is still waiting for the prosecution memos, the FBI 302 interview forms, and the full documentation of who knew what and when. Here is the full story of what was in the 3 million-page release, what was left out and why, what the 38,000 Trump references actually represent, what the missing 302 forms and prosecution memos are, and why Khanna and Massie consider them essential, what Khanna and Massie mean when they say they are prepared to move on impeachment or contempt, what the DOJ's decision to release only half of the 6 million pages it collected means for the Act's compliance requirements, and what the survivors and their advocates are saying about whether this disclosure was enough.
Federal prosecutors initially identifying 6 million pages that comply with the Epstein Files Transparency Act, adding officials had erred on the side of overcollection and later decided to release only half that amount. You know, that's just one of the questions that lawmakers are going to have, including Democrat Ro Khanna, demanding the full release of these files in accordance with the law. Watch.
They did do a release that was significant. I mean, this is the most documents that we have seen released so far in history, but it is not good enough. If we don't get the remaining files, if we do not get the remaining 302 forms, the remaining prosecution memo from 2019, and if the survivors are not happy, then Thomas Massie and I are prepared to move on impeachment or contempt.
So there's getting the files, and then there's the natural next question of what's in them. And specifically, who is it about? The New York Times reports it found more than 5,300 files with references to President Trump in the millions of Epstein documents released. The pages include unverified tips submitted to the FBI alleging misconduct by Trump and Epstein, which agents summarized last summer without corroborating evidence.
But before we continue, if you're enjoying the video, subscribe to Daily News Minutes, leave a like, and comment below what you think about this story. Let me explain what the January 30 release actually contained, because the scale of the disclosure was genuinely historic, and understanding what was in it is essential before evaluating what was left out. The release brought the DOJ's total output under the Epstein Files Transparency Act to approximately 3.5 million pages. 500,000 from earlier releases and approximately 3 million
Donald
from
Trump's
the
Department of
January 30th
Justice
batch.
is now continuing to accelerate the Epstein cover-up catastrophe with the stunt they pulled with
communications from Epstein's emails and text messages, financial records, law enforcement interview summaries, and a massive collection of media, more than 180,000 images and 2,000 videos. The DOJ said it redacted images of all women except Ghislaine Maxwell in order to protect the identities of potential survivors. It withheld documents containing victims' personal or medical information. It withheld child sexual abuse material. It withheld material showing death or violence. Deputy AG Blanche described the review process as meticulous and said the department had worked to ensure that victims were protected from unnecessary breaches of their personal privacy. What the release did show, even in its initial form before systematic analysis, was an Epstein whose world was far more extensively documented by federal investigators than any previous public accounting had suggested. His emails showed active correspondence with prominent figures across politics, finance, academia, and entertainment. His text messages showed how he managed his relationships with potential visitors and staff at his properties. His financial records showed the scale of the operation he ran, including the payments that flowed through his network. The release was also notably disorganized. Journalists who began working through the materials described finding unredacted victim names and images in some documents, despite the DOJ's stated commitment to protecting survivor identities, including, in one striking detail, an image of President Trump's face in a news clipping that had been obscured with a black box, while other materials involving identifiable people had not been redacted. This is Daily News Minutes. If you're enjoying the video, subscribe to the channel, leave a like, and comment below. The January 30th release brought the total DOJ disclosure to 3.5 million pages, including 180,000 images, 2,000 videos, Epstein's private communications, and internal FBI investigative documents. The DOJ stated it had redacted victim images and protected personal information, while journalists found inconsistencies including unredacted victim names in some documents and a blacked-out image of Trump's face in a news clipping. Is a 3.5 million-page release that is unorganized, internally inconsistent in its redactions, and published 6 weeks past the legal deadline a compliance effort or a document dump designed to fulfill the appearance of transparency while making genuine analysis difficult? Let me explain the 38,000 Trump references specifically, because this is the number that dominated immediate coverage of the release and the distinction between what those references represent and what they prove is one of the most important distinctions in the entire story. The New York Times, using its own search tool, found more than 5,300 files in the new release, containing more than 38,000 mentions of Trump, his wife Melania, his Mar-a-Lago club, and other related words and phrases. That number sounds large, and it is large in terms of raw volume. But the character of those references is critical to understanding what the files actually show. The vast majority of the 38,000 references fall into three categories. The first category is news clippings. Epstein's operation collected and archived enormous amounts of media coverage about people in his orbit. Trump was a frequent subject of news coverage throughout the period these documents span. Every news clipping about Trump that appeared in Epstein's collected materials generates a hit in a keyword search for his name. That is not evidence of a relationship. It is evidence that Epstein saved news articles. The second category is uncorroborated tips submitted to the FBI. After Epstein's 2019 arrest and death, the Bureau received a large volume of public tips alleging connections between various prominent figures and Epstein's abuse network. Many of those tips mentioned Trump. FBI agents summarized those tips in documents called 302 forms, a standard format for recording information received during an investigation. Summarizing a tip is not the same as corroborating it. The documents themselves make this clear. The FBI noted that the tips were unverified. The third category is documents showing that Epstein monitored Trump's public life and sought ways to use his prominence for Epstein's own purposes. These documents show Epstein as a man who paid close attention to the powerful figures in his social world and tried to leverage their reputations and connections. They show Epstein watching Trump. They do not show Trump participating in Epstein's crimes. Trump has consistently and categorically denied any misconduct related to Epstein. He has acknowledged knowing Epstein socially from decades earlier, including at events at Mar-a-Lago in the 1990s. He has said that once he became aware of Epstein's conduct, he banned him from the club and ended the relationship. This is Daily News Minutes. If you're enjoying the video, subscribe to the channel, leave a like, and comment below. The
Chairman, thank you
38,000
very
Trump
much.
references
I'm
identified by the New York
by your
Times
First
primarily
Amendment passion.
consist of news clippings, Epstein's Operation
you are
Archive,
the
unverified public tips the FBI received and documented without corroborating, and evidence that Epstein monitored Trump's public profile. Trump has denied any misconduct. The DOJ characterized the Trump-related allegations as lacking credibility. Is a number as large as 38,000 references evidence of wrongdoing, a product of how keyword search interacts with massive document volumes, or evidence that Epstein aggressively tracked powerful people as a matter of operational practice? Let me explain the 302 forms and prosecution memo that Canna and Massey are demanding, because these are the specific documents at the center of the continuing compliance dispute, and understanding what they are tells you why the two lawmakers consider them non-negotiable. FBI 302 forms are the standardized records that agents complete after interviewing witnesses, subjects, or sources. They contain the agent's summary of what was said, the date and location of the interview, and the identity of the people present. They are not verbatim transcripts, but they are the closest thing to a documented record of witness accounts that routinely becomes part of a federal investigative file. In a case as large as the Epstein investigation, which involved years of FBI work, multiple grand juries, interviews with dozens of potential witnesses and associates, and coordination across multiple field offices, the 302 forms would represent the core evidentiary record of what investigators learned, who told them what and when. Many of those interviews would have involved people who knew Epstein's associates, observed his operations, or had direct knowledge of the abuse network. Canna said specifically that the remaining 302 forms and the prosecution memo from 2019 were among the documents still being withheld. The 2019 prosecution memo is particularly significant. That was the year Epstein was arrested in New York on sex trafficking charges. The prosecution memo from that period would document what the government knew about Epstein's network at the moment of his arrest, who was identified as a potential co-conspirator, what evidence had been gathered, and what charges prosecutors believed they could prove. The DOJ decided that Epstein died before the prosecution could proceed, and that the investigation had effectively concluded. But the prosecution memo from 2019 would be a record of exactly who the government had identified as potentially criminally liable at the moment when Epstein was still alive and facing trial. Canna and Massey argue that document is precisely what the Transparency Act was designed to release. This is Daily News Minutes. If you're enjoying the video, subscribe to the channel, leave a like, and comment below. FBI 302 forms are the standardized records of witness interviews that form the core evidentiary record of a federal investigation. The 2019 prosecution memo would document who the government identified as potentially criminally liable at the moment of Epstein's arrest. Canna and Massey are specifically demanding these documents as essential to the Act's purpose. Is withholding the FBI interview records and the prosecution memo that identified potential co-conspirators a legally defensible protection of an ongoing investigation, or a decision to suppress precisely the information the Transparency Act was designed to release? Let me explain what Canna and Massey mean when they say they are prepared to move on impeachment or contempt, because this is a significant escalation, and the specific legal mechanisms they are referencing are distinct from each other. Impeachment in this context refers to the removal process for a federal official, specifically Attorney General Pam Bondi. Under the Constitution, Congress can impeach and remove executive branch officials for high crimes and misdemeanors. Articles of impeachment against an Attorney General would require a majority vote of the full House.
The President of the United States now
the Senate
says
would conduct a trial
that Donald Trump and Jeffrey Epstein hated each other.
Canna made clear that he and Massey were not pursuing impeachment for show.
And Jeffrey
He said
Epstein
explicitly,
just
Massey and I aren't going to just do something for the show of it.
just
He said
dying
the
to get
question
away
of whether
from each
to
other at that
proceed
party
depended
just
on whether they had the
unbearable.
votes,
Look how
meaning
much
enough
they
House
hate each
members willing to support
And we have
impeachment
an endless
of a sitting
stream
Attorney
of
General of the
photographs
same party as the
that
president.
more than we have time
That
to show you
threshold
of
had not
Jeffrey
been
Epstein
met as
and
of his
Donald
statement.
Trump
Inherent
just
contempt is a different
hating each
mechanism
other.
with a much older pedigree.
And here's
the
what
concept
Donald Trump
holds that
said about
Congress has an
Jeffrey Epstein
inherent
in a
constitutional power
2002
to enforce its
profile
own
of
subpoenas
Jeffrey
and
Epstein in
requirements
American
without
Magazine
going
when
to
offered
court.
the opportunity to express how much he hated him. He
through
said,
its own
I've known Jeff for 15 years, terrific guy. He's a lot of fun to be with. It is even said that he
Inherent
likes
contempt
beautiful
has
women
not been
as much
actively
as I
used
do,
in more than a century.
and many of them
its revival would face
are on the
immediate
younger
legal
side.
challenge. But Kana and Massey
And here
were
is the
explicitly
now
naming it as a
world-famous
tool they were
birthday
considering.
card that Jeffrey Epstein
Criminal
received on his
contempt
50th
referral
birthday
involves
in
Congress
2003
referring an
with Donald
individual
Trump's
to the
signature.
DOJ for criminal
The birthday
prosecution
card
under the
says
federal contempt
we have certain
statute.
things in
The practical
common,
problem
Jeffrey,
in this context is obvious.
but it doesn't say that the
entity
thing that
would
we have in
prosecute
common is
the
that we hate
referral
each other.
is the same DOJ
The last line
that is
of
the
the birthday
subject
card
of the
above
contempt
Donald Trump's
allegation.
signature is,
This
"A
is
pal
Daily News Minutes.
is a
If
wonderful
you're enjoying
thing.
the video,
Happy
subscribe to the
birthday,
channel,
and
leave
may
a like,
every day
and comment below.
be
Kana
another
and Massey
wonderful
named 3 escalation
secret.
options. Impeachment
Donald
of Bondi
J.
requiring a House majority they did not yet have.
A pal is a
Inherent
wonderful
contempt, a
thing. When's the
century-old
last
mechanism
time
that would
you
face
said that?
immediate legal challenge,